Good morning, Graham.
Good morning, Bill. I should do the Matt Lewis. Hello, Bill.
So, as you can see, Matt Lewis is off again this week. I don't know where he's gallivanting to. You can also see that our backdrop has significantly upgraded. We're not in some sort of weird West Virginia bunker. We're on like the CNN studios or something like that, Graham.
Yeah, welcome to my Washington studios. Incidentally, I actually live weirdly close to CNN, but I'm not in the CNN headquarters, I'll assure you.
But let's let folks know who you are.
Sure.
And why you're here.
I'm Graham Vyse. I am a magazine writer in Washington, D.C., where I write about politics and media and culture. I am, as of today, a staff writer at Governing Magazine, where I've spent the past year writing about state and local government. But we are very sadly shutting down. And so today is actually, you're getting me on my last day here at Governing.
And I would not have planned it that way because I would not want the social awkwardness of trying to be glib as you are losing your livelihood.
Yes. Well, such is life. Right?
But it is, if I may say, despite the fact that you're going to have no money soon, it is interesting that this is a 30-year-old publication.
I think maybe 32 or 33.
Yeah.
More than, lady is literally older than I
am. That's upsetting. And
it's funny, we were cleaning out, this is totally true. We were cleaning out the paper archive of the sort of print edition archive in a big closet, sort of dusty closet in the governing offices. And I picked up the September 1989 issue, and I was like, this is the issue from the month I was born. Bill, I'm just trying to make you feel old right away.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But this is a magazine that is dedicated to covering state and local government.
Right. The approach was always we're based obviously here in Washington, but we would survey the country and look at sort of trends in state and local politics and policy. We would look at, firsts. So if there's a city or a state that is implementing a sort of at the vanguard of a certain policy discussion, we would write about that. And we really built an audience of particularly people who work in state and local government from the governors on down. I mean, so I think last year, Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor of Los Angeles, came out to D.C. for one of our sort of gala dinners, and he gave this incredible, and this is sort of first-rate pandering in this speech. He sort of said, what a teenage boy feels about Rolling Stone, that's how I feel about governing. I've been reading this, since I was first, interested in local government. But I think there is something to that. We used to hear that Jerry Brown would read us. Various governors. I was actually, let's see. Today we're sitting here on a Friday. So earlier this week, I was up in the city of my birth, Providence, Rhode Island, and I was sort of sitting in a restaurant in the sort of downtown area there with a bunch of local Rhode Island political reporters, and the mayor of Providence walks in with his child and his wife, and I had met him at a U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting here in D.C. a few times, and I broke the news to him that Governing was closing, and he was like, "Oh, that's horrible!" He says in front of all the other assembled local reporters, "Governing was my favorite." That's pretty good.
What surprises me, I mean, this is sort of parallel but not identical to the crisis in local journalism. I mean, we have local newspapers that are dying across the country or on the verge of dying. But I would have thought that a magazine dedicated to state and local governance would have kind of a built-in audience of state and local government employees,
right,
and politicians that would just never go away.
Well, I mean, I should say before I respond to that our parent company, eRepublic, which owned us, is based out in California, and I, like many journalists, was not involved and know very little about the sort of business side of things.
Right.
But I will say that I don't think the problem was that we weren't being read by state and local officials or even people in state and local government. I think my understanding is that we didn't charge a subscription for the magazine. I think we were pretty much giving it away. And
that's a tough business model.
And I think that the idea was. Again, that's what I never heard about a subscription, and so so we were sort of supported by this company, which is a kind of they do events, they sort of put advertisers in front of state and local leaders. And so, there's a statement, if people go to governing.com, there's a full statement that sort of explains, the company's rationale for why it closed. But, the bottom line is that it did come as a surprise to all of us. And, I found out literally on vacation I was up in Massachusetts in your neck of the woods. I just get a call from my editor, and she says, "Look, I know you're on vacation, but we need to talk." And that was it was. I'm in like pretty good spirits considering.
Well, I guess if you're a young person going into journalism, you kind of know you're going into a war zone where or a game of Survivor. Like how can I hang on as long as I possibly can? I mean, did you go into this thinking? This is a 5-year proposition. All these jobs are going to be going away by then. I'm going to do it for as long as I can. Then I'm going to go do something else. Or do you feel more optimistic, like there's a way to still survive in this business?
I mean, the problem with my answer is it is like a total cliche, which is like, this is like what I've always wanted to do. I thought maybe, when I was a teenager, I thought maybe I wanted to go to film school and sort of, tell stories about politics that way. But working at the intersection of politics and media, like literally, since I was like 14 or 15 has been what I wanted to do. And so I guess my plan is to sort of ride it out as long as I can. But it's certainly not, it's like, one does think, is this going to happen at the next place that I work? It's like, I'm just going to constantly have to worry about everyone getting their head chopped off, every time.
Now, one of the ironies here is that you did a deeply reported article for the Washington Post magazine about the death of local media only a few months ago.
Yeah. And it was specifically about the death of I think the headline was something like a ludicrously local or parochial chain of hyper-local papers here in Washington, D.C., which actually gave me my first job in journalism. It's interesting. I've heard slightly older reporters talk about this, that there used to be a trajectory for young people in journalism where you would start out at you could literally start out at like your local paper or at some very small daily paper or weekly paper, maybe in your state or community.
Doing the police blotter and
right, somewhere. And and then if you did well there, you get promoted to the state level, maybe the statewide daily, and then from there you could go on to if you were super lucky, your dream job at the Washington Post or the New York Times. That trajectory in general seems not to really hold anymore. Where I think if your goal is to end up, for example, as a national political reporter, I think most people are sort of moving to Washington or moving to New York or moving to even to Los Angeles and trying to get in at the ground floor at some of these organizations. So, for example, Politico, where you, of course, our audience will know you, right? Mm-hmm. The idea would be you become like a web producer, or you get an entry-level job as a sort of on a sort of wonky policy beat, maybe behind the paywall at their sort of Politico Pro policy shop, and then from there, if you thrive, you can go on to maybe within an organization like Politico, you go on to bigger and better things. So the reason that this, people are wondering what does this have to do with this piece that I read. My trajectory was kind of unusual in that I actually did have my first job in journalism at this sort of hyper-local community paper. We literally didn't have a website, right? So it was just sort of, they would post the PDF scan of the layout online, but every week, but it was mostly just a weekly dead tree paper. And it was the summer of maybe 2013, and I had gotten out of journalism school, and I thought, I've interned at Slate and I've interned at the WashingtonPost.com, and I'm gonna really, I'm gonna get a big, brand name Politico reporting job out of graduate school. I put out something like 70 resumes, and it was just a brutal summer where I got nothing. And randomly, I was walking. The way I remember it is, I was walking down like Wisconsin Avenue near where I was living in Tenleytown, which is the neighborhood near American University here in Washington, and I literally stumbled upon this newspaper, the Northwest Current. I thought, well, maybe they have a job, and so I cold called the editor there. This really wonderful man who was the sort of the managing editor of the Current newspapers for something like 26 years. His name's Chris Kane, and I sort of told him my story. I've just gotten out of graduate school, and I have
this wasn't through tears. This wasn't, oh my God, thank God you're here.
This is the other thing, is you have to, you always have to be plucky and optimistic. And so, he didn't have anything at the moment, but a month later someone quit, and long story short, for all of, $25,000 a year, I think I got a raise to something like 28, which in Washington, D.C. is like literally the least you could possibly live on if you have 4 housemates and get your student loans, deferred or whatever, and you're like going to the grocery store and taking the bus. That was my first job.
I'm getting very, very bad Washington D.C. flashbacks when I was 21 years old, so I understand.
But so I actually spent the better part of 2 years at that paper, and it turned out that the years I was there between, again, sort of the summer of 2013 and the summer of 2015 coincided with this super compelling mayoral campaign here in Washington, where the sitting mayor was this guy Vince Gray, was sort of under investigation for campaign finance corruption, and nothing ended up. They never sort of proved that he did anything wrong, but during that campaign, it was very much in the air, and like half the city council ran for mayor, and so I actually, I remember being, in the Ward 4 Democratic straw poll, and sort of it was just the absolute ground level of politics. And it's sort of corny to say, but it turned out to be like a really great first job in journalism. And I wrote in this very long, it's like a 5,000 word sort of reported piece about the death of this paper, which finally closed. I guess it would have been at the end of. I'm not sure. It was in the past few years that the paper shut down, and it really did. It made me feel like I was connected to the community. It actually sort of. Do
you still live in this area?
I don't live, actually. I've moved out of. We covered the Northwest quadrant, which is sort of the more affluent. It's where for our viewers and listeners who are, national politics junkies, this is sort of the area where most of the DC elite, the journalists and politicians and think tank people and lobbyists, where they would all live. So I like to think that, on their doorstep, in fact, it's funny, for the piece, I talked to Mark Leibovich, the author of This Town, which is sort of the definitive portrait of the Capitol power brokers. And he sent me this great email. He said, I have, of course, as a Northwest resident, had this paper, thrown up on my doorstep, but I can't say it makes it into the house that often. Leibovich it wasn't, but there actually were a lot of people, Sidney Blumenthal's wife, this is sort of Hillary Clinton confidant who featured prominently in the WikiLeaks documents, and he his wife Jackie was a neighborhood commissioner in Glover Park, who I covered pretty closely. And so, there's a bunch of WikiLeaks emails where, Jackie Blumenthal makes a cameo, and I thought, boy, I sat there in a school cafeteria and listened to you talk about local issues. So I'm rambling, but it was a great experience where, I did see how, the local perspective is so valuable, and I feel kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I feel kind of fortunate to have that been my first experience in journalism, even if I knew I wanted to go on to cover national stuff.
Well, so just to broaden this out a little bit before we shift to national politics, do you see what happens to a community when they lose their local media? Because we're seeing this in other places. We're seeing a lot of local papers on the precipice. Like that business model just doesn't seem to be working anymore. Is this something that, people are going to shrug their shoulders? Like, it's like, this never made it into my house anyway, so what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Or is there a tangible loss of information that a community loses when these papers go away?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, Leibovich, who of course I like his work very much, but I think he was sort of an outlier among the people I talked to. Even in Washington, again, I think your audience might appreciate this. That so David Plotz, who was the longtime editor of Slate and is sort of in podcast world, is on the Slate Political Gab Fest. He, it turned out, had delivered the current newspaper as a kid, and really valued it when he was at the city paper. And I think what he and lots of other people who I talked to said is that there aren't a lot of people in DC, for example, who are going to the sort of neighborhood meetings about zoning or about kind of fights over development or education, school reform issues. I covered a lot of, if you want to see kind of ground level politics and turf warfare, cover a school boundary change in a sort of good section of town where people, it's literally parents standing up in a meeting and saying, we bought this house here, you will not take my child out of this school. And, they're really serious, important issues. And I think that, a listserv, what people would talk about is, well, now we have listservs, right? But, that can't really take the place of a reporter going to a meeting.
I've been on some local listservs. They cannot. That is not the same thing.
No. And they have their place and, it's sort of amusing, I'm sure. But,
I feel a lot of, I live in a, small New England city.
Right.
I mean, listservs.
Great New England city.
Why, thank you. And we still have our local media, but, there is a concern that, it's tough going for them. So much information is pushed through on Facebook and listservs, and it is not reporting. It's ranting and word of mouth and often not accurate. And if that's the lifeblood of a community conversation, that's not good. It's not going to give you the quality of information you need to make informed decisions about your neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, and that was. That's a really good point. Part of our whole mission at the Current was the idea that even the most, we probably wouldn't have put it in these terms, but even the most ridiculous, parochial, absurd kind of local concern or neighborhood squabble, we took it seriously and sort of in a good faith way and tried to report it, down to how should the lap lanes in a community swimming pool be laid, right? The kind of thing, speed bumps, right? Traffic circles, big knockdown, drag out fights at community meetings about these subjects. And of course, we would all go back to the newsroom and sort of laugh about, the sort of cast of characters. But we felt like that to actually treat those community issues in a serious way, and to get all sides and to really embed in a journalistic fashion in these neighborhoods is it's a civic service. It's a community service, and frankly, I'll give sort of a shout out to some of my former colleagues. I always knew that I hoped to someday move on and not stay at the current, my whole career. But there were people who, our managing editor, who was there for something like 26 years, a fellow American University graduate. There was a guy who I work with there who said he would have been willing to stay there his whole career, which again, to me, like, I was not, but that's, think about how valuable that is.
Yeah.
You would have people who built up institutional knowledge, and what we're seeing all across the country, particularly in kind of outside of cities where there's a sort of robust media market and sort of bigger cities. Frankly, like Washington actually has a much stronger local news presence here. WAMU, DCS, the Washington Post, the city paper. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. We're actually not sort of the problem, a sort of problematic community compared to some of the places across the country where there's this sort of local news desert. And the other thing, sort of getting back to governing, is that, my understanding is that there are now state houses. Think about this. State houses, state capitals, where there's basically either no reporters or like a handful of reporters, just like covering, like, so you have an entire state government apparatus, like making policy, changing the way people live. And there's just, virtually no accountability journalism there. That seems like a sort of civic crisis.
Yeah. No, and I fear it is not too far away from us that it's going to be noticeable and not so easy to. There's a lot of times where it's creative destruction and the old thing goes away and the new thing comes in, and something will fill the void. Right. Something will let you know in some way what's going on, but I don't have a great deal of confidence it's going to be with the right level of quality and seriousness of purpose.
Right.
We have, I don't want to, name names, with my own neighborhood, but, there's one media operation that's sort of newer, that does nominal local coverage, but it's very superficial. And the business model is much more, things like, here's a 2,000 photo slideshow of all the high school proms in the area, because that gets clicks. That gets more clicks than what happened in the city council meeting. So there'll be some local coverage that exists in the world, but it's going to be the same kind. That's going to be what you need to make good democratic decisions. That I'm not confident about.
No, and so I think I do feel sad that not only is a place like governing that looked to sort of highlight trends and best practices and kind of firsts is now shutting down. But I would say even more importantly, that just at the ground level at cities and states around the country, it really is a crisis. And I think there's a lot of thinking in the industry going on about what to do, what investments can be made. It's an open question as to what the solution is here, and I can see the sort of strengths and weaknesses of having kind of someone like a Bezos come in and buy a paper like the Post. But even if the reality is, like, those people don't exist in abundance, even with the flaws of that model, and so it's a sad situation, and I don't have any easy answers.
On that happy note, let's shift to our typical DMZ business. This is the DMZ, by the way. I don't know if I even mentioned it. Matt always says, "Welcome to the DMZ." That's not my job.
Yeah.
But this is the DMZ on bloggingheads.tv. So as often is done here, there is a healthy dose of self-promotion. I wrote a piece at Politico earlier this week about Elizabeth Warren and the lingering Native American ancestry controversy. The previous week, she had spoken at a Native American presidential forum, And so at the Native American Presidential Forum, Warren, ahead of time, she had a plan for tribal lands, expanding tribal sovereignty, and investing in housing, education, and crime prevention and such. She did a brief apology for the harm she caused, though she did not go into details about what that meant, but obviously a reference to the controversial DNA test she took to try to prove her own heritage. The response she got at the forum was very positive. Several people said that I'm talking to the next president of the United States. Clearly, there was not an interest amongst the attendees to dwell on the past controversy. But in my reading of the data, I don't think it is wise for the Warren campaign and other Democrats to assume she had a good forum, she's rising in the polls. She must have put this controversy to rest. So you had just before the forum, Donald Trump giving at a rally saying, we're going to bring Pocahontas back. I did it too early. We hit her hard, but now she's on the rise. Don't worry, we're going to bring it back. And the RNC had a press release with an Oppo research memo that dropped right before the forum, calling her a liar. Now you could say, well, they're going to say that she's rising in the polls. The Native American leadership seems to be forgiving, but her rise in the polls is almost solely from progressive voters. She's not making inroads with moderate Democrats in the primary, and you can find polls where she is beating Trump, but the average of those polls, she's still not doing as well versus Trump as Biden or Bernie. It does not mean that she can't get over it and that she is fully compromised, but I don't think you can argue that she has solved the problem. Solving the problem with the left doesn't mean you've solved the problem with the middle. So, as you might imagine, when I wrote this piece exploring the possibility that Warren still has a Native American controversy problem, it was not received warmly by Warren fans. And one of the problems is, and I this was a reported piece. I talked to 3 Democratic operatives, I talked to 2 Republican operatives, and I talked to Democratic operatives who had been in the Clinton campaign and the Kerry campaign, like people who have been on the brunt of nasty Republican tactics, thinking, I would, not that they would, throw Warren under the bus, but would be like, oh yeah, well, this is what they do, and you really got to do this, and you can never assume you're in the clear, and they weren't completely sanguine. They weren't like, oh yeah, nothing to see here, but on the whole, they were very positive about Warren. She's handled this well. She's doing the right things. You can see her by her rise in the polls that she's in good shape. And the Republicans are like, man, you guys haven't done anything. I would post the Democrats, the Republicans say that they're going to, because the challenge is, it's one thing to say, I'm sorry, Native Americans, that I was insensitive about the treatment of heritage and tribal citizenship. I'll do better next time. That's a different apology, a different issue than you are fundamentally a liar. Right. So Republicans are saying you lied about yourself and your identity, and you have not apologized for that. And there are some voices in the Native American community. One of the most prominent is a woman named Rebecca Nagel, who has a podcast on Crooked Media, right, who is arguing Warren's ancestors are whites who took Cherokee land, and now their descendants are saying we are Cherokee. Yep. That's like insult on top of insult. But that aside, you can go to the white moderate swing voter potentially and say Elizabeth Warren is a liar. She's a cheater. She says she wants to fix a rigged system. She rigged the system to benefit herself and to protect Harvard from having to increase their ranks of professors of color. You can't trust her. And when I posed that to the Democratic operatives, they would say, Donald Trump's the biggest liar in the business. He can't get away with calling someone else a liar. The Republicans are saying, oh, yes, he can. Yeah. The whole point is he levels the playing field. He drags everybody down to his level, and then it becomes a wash, and you're talking about something else. So the response I get on social media is, you should write an article about Trump's lies. How dare you treat this like a serious thing? And my response is, if you are a Warren supporter or someone who is just simply trying to assess the candidate's abilities going forward, you want to look at this issue with very open eyes and make sure you have dealt with it as much as possible so you are not blindsided in the future. And you have, I think, a plausible case that there is something that has been left unattended here, right, as far as what moderate swing voters might be vulnerable to hearing. And it doesn't mean I'm saying, it is possible Trump is so damaged that it doesn't matter at all, and he can't beat anybody. I mean, I can't dismiss that possibility, but it's dangerous to assume it.
That possibility seems unlikely. I mean, I my feeling on this has always been that when the election day actually arrives and, there's been this long drawn out campaign, I think it's highly likely that the race will narrow, and will become quite close. I mean, the idea that Trump is going to sort of be blown out, just seems, I mean, I suppose I could be wrong, but that just seems totally unreasonable. I also think that you're right that she has had, I mean, there was one, I forget which publication it was, but there's this idea of the summer of Warren, right? That she's had this great summer.
GQ,
okay.
Which she has.
Oh, and I think, her campaign she's running a terrific campaign. I think she's got a real shot at being the nominee, but it seems like, to your point, it's more that she has kind of gotten past that issue for now, as opposed to having resolved it or sort of permanently taken it off the table. And so, yeah, I think what we've learned about Donald Trump is that no shame, unfazed by hypocrisy, and that certainly for his diehard voters, who, in fairness, I suppose Warren is not really going after, the Democrats wouldn't go after, there will be no contradiction between his kind of daily absurd, dishonest, craven behavior and going after Warren on something like this. And so, and I think you're right that part of what he clearly, manifestly did in 2016 is hammer Hillary Clinton on an issue that, really, I think, did pale in comparison to his own problems. But it became such a sort of mudslinging back and forth that you had huge amounts of people who sort of said, well, they're both awful, right?
One of the criticisms I have, and when I spoke to one of the people in the piece, I didn't quote this part, and I wanted to. I was trying to find a way to get in. I wasn't trying to not do it to insulate myself. But he mentioned that the problem for Democrats is that the mainstream media abets these lies, that the Trump Republicans level these scurrilous attacks, and the mainstream media feels an obligation to report on the attacks, and by doing so, spread the attacks. Mm-hmm. And he didn't say this in a mean way to me, but he was like, you're writing this piece, you're writing this stuff, so this is part of the cycle. And it's fine to, I think, note that dynamic and realize that is how Republicans are able to push
there's
these things.
Some truth to it.
But it's not like I don't think it behooves mainstream media or behooves Democrats to say, well, the solution is for mainstream media to pretend this doesn't exist.
Right.
Because they have other ways to amplify it outside of the mainstream media that can reach those voters through social media and such. I mean, a number of scores attacks on Hillary were not done through mainstream media, but were done underground with the help of Russian troll bots and such. So if you don't talk about it, air it out, and analyze it, I don't think you necessarily get anywhere. Part of the Warren strategy is a base strategy. And I think part of the argument is that Democrats should have a base strategy, that there aren't that many swing voters out there to get. And so, Warren's numbers started sort of artificially low because of the Native American controversy in 2018. Trump was hitting her on it. Her numbers were starting to fall before the DNA test. They fell further after the DNA test, and she was below 5% at the turn of the year when she announced her campaign. So she has risen from an artificially low point through partial consolidation of the left, Bernie aside, and which makes her seem like she's on the rise. I mean, she is on the rise, but there's still this open question: can she keep rising by either getting more of the Bernie vote or more of the moderate vote, or combination thereof? And there's a second question. Yeah, she beats Trump in most trial heat polls, but there are analyses that you got to beat him by more than 5 points. You got to beat him by more than 5 million voters to overcome the Electoral College issue, and she does not consistently do that. Whereas Biden does, and you can make an argument that Bernie does that most of the time. So I think the questions are still out there, but the diehard Warren fans don't want to address that because they don't necessarily believe that the path of success is by appeasing swing voters. They think they can juice the base vote and get it done that way, and therefore these types of debates are irrelevant. And
do you think, to put you on the spot a little bit, do you think this is a kind of classic articulation of the two theories of the case that we've been hearing for a long time, and progressives, have always said the idea is to expand the electorate, the idea is to juice turnout among communities that historically haven't turned out. This is sort of the base mobilization approach. And is it your sense that you feel confident that wouldn't work, and that you have to kind of reach out to moderates, or to kind of...
I wouldn't say have to. I don't want to make any kind of, flat predictions. What is the right model? Obviously, Trump got pretty far without appealing to a lot of swing vote.
Literally has, the pivot never came.
Right.
Literally has never expanded his approach at all.
Right. But I do think it's dangerous to assume I'm going to do this one strategy, not the other strategy. I'm not going to try to hit all my targets for opportunity. If you voted for Trump, you're a racist, and you're not going to hear what I want to say, so forget it. I think there's a fair amount of statistical and anecdotal data that is not correct, that there are people who are open to hearing a Democratic argument. There are people who are perhaps not as interested in a Bernie argument or a Warren argument. They might want more of a... I just saw it today, a messaging operation. There's this report on the Philly Inquirer. They did a profile of 2 Obama-Trump voters, one that was trending away from Trump and one that was doubling down on Trump. And they also said there's this, I forget the name of the operation, they've been doing interviews of Obama-Trump voters saying that there's a good number who want to hear what Democrats have to say, but they want a more moderate message, which cuts against the Bernie argument, which is if I give you the full-blown economic populism, democratic socialism, I can galvanize not just Democratic base vote, but white working class vote. Now, again, that's one study. It may be that people hate Trump so much that just doesn't matter at all. And you can put up a potted plant and that person's going to win. I think it behooves Democrats to maximize their targets for opportunity and try to spread the field, try to find a way to juice base and reach out to moderate voters. And there are ways to do that by, probably by modulating your message to some extent and not, doubling down on every progressive wish list item. But that's just my personal Pennsylvania.
Let me ask you this about Warren. Do you think the fact that she talks about being a former Republican, the fact that she says,
she doesn't talk about that much. I mean, it's been reported, but she doesn't stress it in her stump.
All right, good point. So the fact that she is a former, and I suppose she would have that available to her if she wanted to talk about it. What she does say is she's a capitalist and that she's not a socialist. And, I did this piece, years ago, probably like 2017, which you and I have talked about, where I sort of argued that Warren, this is for the New Republic, where I was a staff writer before I was at Governing, and I argued that Warren was sort of the heart of the Democratic Party, which is not to say that I thought at the time that she necessarily should be the candidate, but that she was finding this sweet spot where she was to the right in some meaningful way of Sanders and the kind of full bore democratic socialism. She calls herself a capitalist. She sort of pitches her case more as for reforming and unrigging the existing system as opposed to blowing up the system. But it must be said she's also like well to the left of Obama, of sort of probably huge amounts of sort of certainly previous Democrats. And so I wonder I guess my question for you is, I wonder if you think that ends up being helpful to her in any way, or if you think there isn't, voters won't really see a meaningful difference between her and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Sanders, or sort of the truly DSA wing of the party.
Well, if we're narrowing to a 3 or 4 person race, which we probably are, I mean, I think you have at least. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, Biden could always self-destruct, and we can get to Biden in a second. Let's assume Biden does not self-destruct. Right. Biden's got the moderate lane. Warren has the left but still capitalist lane, and Bernie has the full bore Democratic socialist lane. And Kamala's still out there as a potential left/pragmatist in between Warren and Biden, but she's struggling to even own that space.
It would require her to decide who she is and sort of articulate. I mean, I think when she had her moment on stage with Biden, I thought, this is it. She's gonna, she could catapult to the nomination. I think she has a huge amount of political talent, but it does seem like she's not sure really how she wants to run. Is she going to do the pragmatism thing anyway? So
I think she is increasingly doing the pragmatist thing, but it's hard for her to get noticed during that because Biden's still around.
But you were saying the lanes are.
But Warren, I think, sort of Kamala on paper,
right,
makes sense in that she should be able to unify left and middle in the Democratic Party spectrum. Warren on paper has some capability to do that. You definitely hear from. I talked to 3 firmly establishment Democratic operatives who were very positive on Warren. People who were with Hillary Clinton, people who were with John Kerry. Right. I think there's more comfort there than there is with Bernie.
I mean, look at how she's conducted herself the past few years. She's clearly someone who has worked within the system of kind of, my understanding is that she's sort of close with the leadership of the party in the Senate, on Capitol Hill. She is. I think she's an institutionalist. I think she's someone who.
Well, I disagree with you there. I do think she wants to be a norm buster.
She wants to be a norm buster, but my point is that she. I think Sanders seems like he has been more of an outsider than she has been.
Well, Sanders is more of Warren is more of a party institutionalist. Okay. She is explicitly, she went to a DNC meeting. Yeah. We do a DNC meeting, reminded, hey, I gave all this money to these candidates. I've been fundraising for you guys for a long time. I want to build up the party. Whereas Bernie is very explicitly, it's us against them. It's us against the party establishment. We need to overtake these people and return this party to its populist roots.
He's much more critical of the institutional Democratic Party than she is, by a long shot. And
So if it was a brokered convention and it was a hair's difference between Bernie and Warren, those superdelegates are going to come in for Warren.
You're right.
But having said that, you look at that rise in the polls that she has roughly flatlined for about a month. Every so often you get one poll where she is a point or two behind Biden. There's basically the there's the Economist YouGov poll, and I forget what the second poll is, where she tends to have her pretty high. And so one of those polls will come out and go, "This is it. It's about to turn. She'll overtake Biden. Biden's going to lose that veneer of inevitability, and it's going to be a game changer." And then 3 more polls come in, and she's in 3rd place behind Bernie. So again, I'm not saying she can't keep going up, but she hasn't in the past few weeks. So these Summer of Warren type profiles that you're seeing are, I think, a bit lagging based on the freshest poll data, and that is because she can't fully consolidate the left because Bernie has his diehards, and there is still questions about her electability with a good chunk of the Democratic electorate, and they're sticking with Biden for now. Now, to pivot to Biden, he had another controversy yesterday. The Washington Post saying that he got a war story wrong, 8 ways till Sunday. And it sort of leaves it to the reader to wonder what the larger import is. Is it that he is losing his faculties altogether? Is it that he is a long-time fabulist, as our good friend Matt Lewis pointed out in his Daily Beast column today? Did he just conflate a couple different stories? Because the piece ends on, here's a big chunk of the story that is true. He did pin the medal on this person who felt he didn't deserve it because someone died on his watch. And therefore, this whole thing isn't that big of a deal overall, which is what the Biden campaign is coming back and saying, hey, this essence of the story's right. You're making a mountain out of a molehill here. I don't know what the broader public's going to feel about this. Is there going to be one gaffe, one misstatement too many, and people wonder either A, you're just losing it, buddy, like you're just not all there, or this is you've always been like this, and that's not good vis-a-vis Trump, because just like it may not be fair that he can pick apart Warren on the Native American ancestry controversy, he can pick you apart on never getting your facts right, and that's going to be a problem. Or is it C, this is the way Biden's always been, and people still like Biden anyway. He still polls well in the primary. He still polls well versus Trump. So this is not a big deal. So I'm not prepared to write the same kind of piece about Biden as I wrote about Warren, because as of today, he polls very, very well against Trump consistently, nationally, in swing states. So you can't say as of yet this is damaging him. But again, there could be one thing too many, and it does turn. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of complicated feelings about this subject. I'll start by saying that when I was at the New Republic, I wrote what I think was a very warm piece about Joe Biden, in which I sort of said that the Obama presidency had really elevated his legacy. It had caused people to either forget about or sort of embrace the kind of gaffe-prone Uncle Joe character, and it had, I think, really humanized and brought out all of the qualities that you've talked about, that make him appealing to a lot of people. But I also did say in that piece, this is years ago, that he shouldn't run for president because, I was sort of piggybacking on some other commentary there that had been at the time, that he shouldn't run for president because all of the sort of shall we say, dated policy positions he had taken would be resurfaced. That it would be an opportunity for kind of his worst, most gaffe-prone, most kind of out of touch attitudes and impulses to be showcased. obviously, I think once you want to run for president, you really never stop wanting to run for president. You're totally right that the polls show consistently that he's ahead. I love, by the way, there's literally he's running an ad in which it's like all the polls agree. Right. Biden is the best.
And I think that was not a smart ad. These other ads I think are very good. I don't.
I love phrase. All the polls agree. Right. But. And even in my own family, I mean, I was telling you offline that my mother, who is a Mount Holyoke graduate who worked at Planned Parenthood out of college and became a social worker, she's sort of leaning Warren. But my stepfather, who is also very liberal and sort of reliable Democratic voter, he's in the Biden camp and pretty firmly so. And again, the idea is experience. The idea is trustworthy, and I think they are both representative of what polls suggest Democrats care about most, which is we just need someone who's going to put us out of our misery and get Trump out of the office. And they buy the idea, or at least many Democrats do, that Biden is the safe choice. And this gets to my own misgivings and doubts, is that I actually think that what we've seen since Biden launched is that he is, to put it charitably, an unreliable and inconsistent campaigner. Yeah. I mean, I totally acknowledge that when he talks about grief, when he is able to be sort of personal and empathetic, he has a quality for sure, but he continues to be a gaffe machine. He continues to put his foot in his mouth, and I do think that he seems, there's no way around it. He seems kind of. It's not even it's so much about age, because I would say that Sanders really doesn't always seem like this. Sanders seems pretty sharp to me. There have just been moments when Biden has seemed like he's a beat or two behind where he ought to be, and kind of dazed or put back on his heels. And I worry that won't wear well as the campaign goes on. I also would make one final point, which is that there is no doubt, it's probably smart for him to just do the big bear hug to Barack Obama, who is obviously an enormously popular figure and a beloved president in the Democratic Party. And I think Biden can credibly say that he was the number two right there fighting for all those causes. I would point out that he is in fact not Barack Obama. He does not have the charisma, the sort of inspirational, kind of, John Kennedy meets Martin Luther King Jr. With From the Land of Lincoln. Obama was a once in a generation political talent, a once in a generation orator, a once in a generation kind of galvanizer of a youth movement, really, which I was part of in 2008 as a college student, to get behind him. And I do worry that there is such a cultural disconnect between Biden and people my age or people kind of younger, that I think for some reason, maybe because either because they're left or because they are closer to the age of millennials and Gen Z folks, some of the other candidates, I think would have an easier time rallying, young people and progressives. And I do worry that Biden has become kind of like the person who is most reviled and maybe that turns out not to matter that much.
But it's not an insignificant point. And the piece that you wrote in the Republic, I think, whether or not you get the bottom line that they should not have run, you were proven correct. By running,
yes,
they have dug up all the stuff from his past, and so his legacy is not as uniformly praised as it was, the last day of the Obama presidency. He's having to defend the past, and he's been forced to be less of a unifying figure in the party and more of an aggressively moderate figure. What? Pushing back on the left.
I mean, there's that ad in which he says some version of, we need to defend Obamacare, not scrap it. And I mean, he's actually taking shots at the left, which I actually think, in his defense, like, I think you kind of have to do that because you have to, you know, I was listening to, right before we got on, to Pod Save America, and they were sort of chiding Biden very, very carefully, but they were sort of saying, I don't like this approach of going after the Medicare for all people. I think, like, you do have to establish, you know, a difference and sort of articulate why. I mean, so I don't necessarily fault him.
What I think, and by doing that, I mean, the Biden critics always thought that he was, you know, empty suit. It's all name ID. There's no real Biden fans out there. It's all this very wispy notions of electability. And as soon as he gets punctured, that's all going to fall apart. And I think what has happened is, by being aggressively moderate, he has shown that there is an aggressively moderate faction in the party, and that includes a large part of his African American support. And so, again, I can't predict next week if this current controversy is going to be the one, but to date, you are seeing people who are Biden loyalists, who defend him upon the gas and defend him on his past and say I mean, some people just say, I'm not excited about him, but I think he can win. And there's some people saying he is a great person with a big heart, and that is shown through all these examples, and it shows his authenticity, and that's why he's the more electable one. That's why he can win in these Rust Belt areas. So if he can maintain, you know, 30% or so, and, you know, Warren and Bernie can't really break out of, you know, high teens, low 20s. Yeah. I mean, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of polls. I mean, granted, you know, you can't just cleanly smush Warren and Sanders voters together, because there's some Sanders people that do not like Warren. There's some more people that do not like Sanders. But you can't just even look at those numbers and say, if you just smush them together, they are bigger than Biden's number, because that's not the case in a lot of polls. It's kind of roughly the same. It may well be that Biden can get to the nomination through this strategy, but at the same time, leaving behind a younger faction that does revile him and may not be there for him in general.
And revile may even be strong, but they're definitely not enthusiastic, and there's a lot of sort of eye rolling and feeling demoralized. I'll say real quick on the kind of who gets whose voters when other candidates drop out. There was I thought a really good, admittedly anecdotal, but a really good Michelle Goldberg column in the New York Times, in which she basically, I think she went to Iowa, or she certainly went to one of the early primary states and talked to voters. And what she was surprised to find was that, like, there were a lot of Biden people who were, like, thinking, like, maybe Warren, maybe Biden, like maybe Sanders, maybe Biden, you know, and her point, which I thought was really worth making, is that I don't know that we also know who that, for example, every voter who was with Warren would be with Sanders, or every voter that was with Sanders would be with Warren. And so I don't know if you've seen any good data on that sort of thing.
Well, there are some, you know, second choice polls that show, I mean, they don't all say the same thing. I know off the top of my head, you know, Morning Consult has Sanders people's second choice is Biden. And Warren people's second choice is Kamala, although some of these numbers might have shifted around, so excuse me if I'm not quite up to date. And it's not like it's, you know, 90% of Sanders voters go to Biden. It's like, you know, 30%, and then Warren's 25%. So there are some people who I think ideology is the tie.
Yeah.
And there's some people that gender is the tie, or some people who think I just can't stand Warren because she's not a socialist and she didn't endorse Bernie, so I'm just writing her off and I'll take the next person down the line. Or Warren person that said, I just can't do a socialist, so I'll do Biden or Harris or Buttigieg or whatever.
I also think your point about, you know, one of the, honestly, probably one of the most salient bits of data so far is the fact that sort of middle-aged and older black voters seem to be really committed to Biden, and there has not been a candidate yet who's really been able to, according to polls, convince them to desert him. And it reminded me that sometime since Trump won, there was, I think it was also on Pod Save America, there was a conversation with Joyanne Reid, the MSNBC host, in which she talked about why she felt that black voters hadn't, and I should be careful to say, young black voters were with Sanders, but middle-aged and older ones were not. And her thing was, black voters are not here for the revolution. Mm-hmm. They're more pragmatic. They sort of feel like the idea that we're going to kind of have this great, uprooting of the system. She talked about the idea of the church lady voter, the auntie voter, in a place like South Carolina. And, I am interested, and I'm not going to sit here with great confidence and say that you could never sort of change the game on this, but I'm interested to see if the pragmatism that Biden has, and the connection that he has with them, maybe that's part of it. We're just, there's a comfort level there. And also that, one thing I'll say is that for all my concerns and criticisms of Joe Biden, the implication that Joe Biden, is a racist or is not an ally of the black community, even if people are not explicitly saying that, I don't know that is a persuasive.
It hasn't been. I mean,
right.
Kamala gave a good whack at that, and it didn't stick.
Right, and and it's just setting aside I'm sure it's a very complicated kind of history of busing. It's just I think going to be very clear that Biden is an ally of the black community, and at least that's how they feel. So I'm not. I mean. I agree with you that Biden absolutely may somehow just sort of, plow through. And so my attitude has been, I feel very liberated actually. And I'm just I'm making no predictions. I feel very zen about the whole thing. We'll see. I think that Warren, definitely has a shot. It is now totally plausible to me that she could be the nominee. Sanders has some staying power for sure, and as you said, a diehard fan base. But I feel like it's going to be one of the three of them, right? That's.
I mean, the thing that I hesitate on, if Biden had a total collapse, there's sure. one thing too many, and just went from 30 to 10. That opens up a whole lot of space.
Sure.
I don't think you could say where that Kamala could come in, Cory Booker could come in. Maybe Warren takes a big chunk of that. Maybe Bernie takes a big chunk of that. I mean, the permutations are too many to comprehend.
Did you see that? Stacey Abrams, who for my money is the most talented and exciting Democrat, maybe in the country. I'm very, very enthusiastic about her as a candidate. I think. She's continues to be asked about, would you accept the vice presidency if someone
she's saying yes.
And she's literally oh yeah, that would be great. Something she's I sort of respect. She says I'm not going to be coy. Of course that would be a huge honor. And so you can see a scenario in which Biden wins the nomination. He has alienated or demoralized a chunk of the party, younger people, progressives, but that he then picks an exciting, more left candidate.
I would put more money on Biden Harris than Biden Abrams.
Yeah, well, all right. Even though,
yeah. I think they the healing has begun. They've gotten over their differences. Yeah. Hold the fist up in the air.
I feel the Stacey Abrams thing is have you ever heard her speak? Have you ever listened to? Yeah. I mean, I just think that it's a shame she came so close, and I mean that's a whole other thing about how she actually said she did win, but she's one of many Democrats I think in the country who have just not quite figured out how to find an office that they can occupy, but hopefully she can.
All right, we should wrap it up, but since you are leaving the smoldering embers of governing, where can people find you and find out where you go next?
Sure. I would love for people to follow me on Twitter. My handle is just my name, so it's GRAHAM, V as in Victor, YSE, at Graham Vyse. I'd love for people to go read the Washington Post piece that I wrote about my former newspaper. I believe the headline is "The Death of a Ludicrously Local, Incredibly Essential Newspaper," and that's in the Washington Post magazine. But yeah, I'm, and if you are a publication based in Washington who's looking to hire a staff writer who covers politics and media and culture, I would love to talk with you, or if you'd like me to write for you in some other capacity.
Excellent. The word is out. I'm sure you're going to land in a great place, and thanks for submitting on short notice.
Thank you, Bill. I'm a huge fan of this show and of Blogging Heads more broadly. I've never done a Blogging Head before. This is my maiden voyage, so thanks for having me.
I should say to all the DMZ fans out there, you could be like Graham someday. He was just a regular listener like you, and now look at him.
Long-time fan, first-time caller.
All right, so I think that'll be back next week, and we'll see you guys there on the DMZ. Take care.